Columbia, British Columbia, just off the coast of Kitimat, history is being made. Canada has officially launched its first ever liquefied natural gas, LNG, export to Asia. This isn't just a trade milestone. It's a geopolitical turning point. For the first time in over 30 years, Canadian natural gas is bypassing US pipelines and heading straight overseas. Welcome to Reveal the Planet, your channel for bold insights into global politics, trade, and power. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update on world-shifting events like this one. Section 1, The Turning Point, June 30, 2025. June 30, 2025, Canada's first LNG cargo set sail for Asia from the new LNG Canada export terminal in Kitimat, BC. That single shipment ended Canada's complete reliance on pipelines through the United States, a dependence that had lasted more than 3 decades. Until now, Canada pumped 8.8 billion cubic feet of gas every day into the US, earning $8 billion in 2024. But under Trump's aggressive trade policies, a 10% tariff on Canadian energy products was introduced in March 2025. It sent shockwaves through Canada's oil and gas sector. And that's when Canada pivoted hard. Section 2, The $40 billion LNG Canada Gamble. LNG Canada, a massive $40 billion joint venture between energy giants Shell, Petronas, PetroChina, Mitsubishi, and KOGAS, had been in development for years, and now, that gamble is finally paying off. The project constructed a sprawling 670-kilometer pipeline stretching from Dawson Creek in northern British Columbia all the way to the coastal town of Kitimat, linking the gas-rich Montney Formation directly to Pacific shipping lanes. Visually, you can picture this as a glowing energy artery cutting across snow-covered mountains and dense forests, with footage of heavy machinery, welding crews, and pipe-laying operations under rugged conditions. This engineering feat gives Canada unprecedented ocean access, allowing LNG tankers to reach key Asian markets, like Japan, South Korea, and China, in just 10 days, slicing transit time in half compared to the traditional route through the Panama Canal. Animated globe maps or time-lapse sailing routes could highlight this advantage. Most importantly, this route bypasses the US entirely, avoiding the 10% tariffs imposed under the Trump administration. A symbolic image might show a red tariff stamp being blocked or shattered, while tankers sail freely across the Pacific with no tariffs boldly displayed. It's a strategic pivot away from American dependence, and one that puts Canada squarely on the path to becoming a major LNG exporter on its own terms. Section 3. Asia welcomes a new supplier. Across the Pacific, energy-hungry nations like Japan, South Korea, and China are moving quickly to secure liquefied natural gas that is not only clean and reliable, but also free from the geopolitical baggage tied to Russia or the United States. Japan, the world's largest LNG importer, has already committed to bringing in an additional 20 million tons per year by 2026, driven by its dependence on imported gas for over 80% of its electricity. Meanwhile, South Korea is rapidly expanding its national LNG storage capacity by 50% to ensure long-term energy security, and China, now the fastest-growing LNG consumer on the planet, has signed a series of long-term contracts aimed at locking in stable winter supplies for years to come. Visually, this shift can be depicted with flags and port animations, maps of Asia lighting up with growing demand, and stock footage of industrial facilities, power plants, and tank farms under construction. Enter the gas-logged Glasgow, Canada's first LNG tanker to reach Asia. On June 30, 2025, it departed Kitimat fully loaded with 2.66 million tons of premium, hydro-powered LNG, marking a historic moment. That single voyage didn't just deliver energy. It established a brand new trade corridor. Bypassing both US pipelines and the congested Panama Canal, this new Pacific route cut shipping times in half and eliminated the costly tariffs that once held Canadian exports hostage. Sweeping drone shots of LNG tankers crossing the open Pacific, paired with overlay text like "New Energy Route" or "Tariff-Free Access," would underline just how transformative this development is. For Japan, South Korea, and China, Canada's arrival as a neutral, stable LNG supplier is not just welcome, it's essential. Section 4. A blow to Trump's trade war. The Trump administration believed its tariffs would tighten America's grip on Canadian energy exports, leveraging economic pressure to keep Canadian gas flowing south. But instead of control, Washington triggered a dramatic shift. The 10% tariff on Canadian LNG backfired, pushing Canada to fast-track its independence and open direct access to Asia. Now, with the launch of LNG Canada, over 170 tanker shipments are scheduled annually to Japan, South Korea, and Singapore, creating a robust, Pacific-facing trade pipeline that leaves the US out of the equation entirely. The era of America's de facto monopoly on Canadian gas is over. This is where you can visualize a symbolic crumbling of a pipeline wall between Canada and the US, followed by animated LNG ships freely sailing westward to Asia. For American buyers, the outcome is painful. With tariffs inflating import prices and Canada no longer a captive supplier, US customers are left scrambling. They're now facing significantly higher prices, longer delivery times, and far less negotiating power in a market once tilted in their favor. Some utilities and industrial buyers are even being forced to look across the Atlantic, to Europe, for alternative LNG sources, despite higher costs and longer transit routes. Visually, contrast a chaotic US gas market with price charts spiking and shipping delays stacking up, while clean, efficient tankers head east from Canada to booming Asian ports. Trump's tariff strategy, meant to corner Canada, has instead liberated it, and left America grasping for gas in a market it used to dominate. Section 5. Environmental Edge and Indigenous Partnerships. LNG Canada isn't just a megaproject, it's a model of responsible energy development in the 21st century. Unlike many fossil fuel ventures, this one runs on clean hydroelectric power from British Columbia, giving it one of the lowest carbon footprints of any LNG exporter on Earth. Visualize gleaming white pipelines and modern facilities set against pristine mountain backdrops, powered by rushing rivers and clean energy grids. But the environmental advantage is only half the story. What truly sets LNG Canada apart is its unprecedented partnership with indigenous communities. Over $5.88 billion Canadian dollars in contracts have been awarded to local businesses, many of them indigenous-owned. The Haisla Nation, whose traditional territory includes the port town of Kitimat, didn't just get a seat at the table, they became shareholders. The Haisla now hold equity in the Coastal GasLink pipeline itself, creating one of the rarest and most impactful models of indigenous economic participation in a global energy project. Drone footage of Haisla lands, local businesses, and construction crews working together reinforces this visual message of inclusion and shared prosperity. Over the course of 7 years, the project employed more than 50,000 Canadian workers, technicians, welders, engineers, environmental monitors, and local contractors, stimulating the regional economy and creating long-term infrastructure. This isn't just about exporting energy. It's about building a new kind of energy economy, cleaner, more inclusive, and firmly rooted in reconciliation and local development. For Canada, it represents a future where environmental integrity and indigenous empowerment go hand in hand with global competitiveness. Continued, Section 6. The road ahead, Phase 2 and global competition. As Phase 2 looms, the question isn't just whether Canada can expand its LNG capacity. It's whether the world will allow it to lead in an increasingly competitive and politically charged energy landscape. The stakes have never been higher. Countries like Qatar, the United States, and Russia, despite sanctions and reputational fallout, are aggressively defending their LNG turf. Qatar's massive North Field expansion project is expected to add over 40 million tons of new capacity by 2027, while the US is fast-tracking new export terminals in Texas and Louisiana with backing from multinational banks and private equity. Meanwhile, Russia, cut off from many Western buyers, is quietly pivoting to China with Arctic LNG routes and long-term deals that bypass the need for Western shipping lanes entirely. In this context, Canada's clean, Pacific-facing LNG route isn't just a business opportunity, it's a strategic counterweight in a global chess game of supply, influence, and survival. Canada's edge lies in its geopolitical neutrality and environmental credentials. Unlike Gulf suppliers facing regional instability, or US LNG subject to partisan trade swings and infrastructure bottlenecks, Canadian LNG promises reliability. It's produced under some of the world's strictest environmental and labor standards, powered by hydroelectricity instead of coal-fired plants, and increasingly structured around indigenous partnerships that bolster the project's social license. These aren't just checkboxes. They're potential deal clinchers in negotiations with environmentally conscious Asian governments and corporations seeking to decarbonize their supply chains without compromising energy security. When countries like Japan and South Korea, which have both set aggressive net zero timelines, weigh their LNG options. They're looking for more than price. They're looking for long-term stability and ESG, environmental, social, governance, alignment. LNG Canada offers exactly that. However, the road to Phase 2 is not paved with certainty. Financing remains a key bottleneck. While Phase 1 benefited from a combination of private investment, corporate backing, and government incentives, Phase 2 will require a fresh round of fundraising amid rising global interest rates, stricter green finance criteria, and volatile commodity prices. Investors are asking hard questions. Will Asian demand continue to surge, or will renewables and battery storage erode LNG's future market share? Will Canadian politics remain supportive of LNG exports, or will future governments tighten environmental policy to appease climate activists and international agreements? And then there's the global LNG price volatility, made worse by unexpected shocks, from armed conflicts to natural disasters, to trade blockades and labor strikes. While LNG offers flexibility and a cleaner burn than coal or oil, it is still subject to boom and bust cycles. For Canada to lead, it must hedge against these risks, diversify its buyer base, and integrate future technologies like carbon capture, hydrogen blending, and low-leakage methane controls to stay ahead of the curve. Phase 2 must be built not just for today's market, but for the energy system of 2030 and beyond. In short, Canada is at an inflection point. LNG Canada Phase 2 is not merely an expansion of infrastructure, it is a litmus test for national resolve, strategic foresight, and environmental innovation. Succeed, and Canada becomes an anchor of energy security for Asia, trusted, clean, and politically neutral. Stall, and it risks ceding ground to faster, dirtier, and less transparent competitors. As the world shifts from fossil fuel hegemony to clean tech competition, this project is where those two forces collide. LNG Canada is not just an export terminal, it's a symbol of whether Canada can compete, lead, and inspire in a fractured global order. Section 7, The Global Ripple Effect, Canada's LNG Influence Spreads. The launch of LNG Canada isn't just a win for Ottawa, it's shaking the very foundations of the global energy order. Already, ripple effects are being felt far beyond British Columbia's Pacific shoreline. In Europe, governments watching from afar have taken notice. Countries like Germany, the Netherlands, and Poland, previously reliant on unstable or politically sensitive suppliers, are now exploring Canadian LNG as a future pillar of their energy diversification strategies. Several EU-based energy firms have begun informal talks about long-term contracts for Phase 2 output, especially as Russian gas remains under strict sanctions. Canadian LNG is quickly gaining a reputation not only for its clean energy profile, but also for being politically low risk, an asset that's become just as valuable as price or volume in today's tense geopolitical climate. Meanwhile, in Washington, policymakers are grappling with the unintended consequences of their own tariff strategy. Canada's pivot to Asia has left American buyers facing a shortfall in cheap, pipeline-delivered gas, and mounting pressure from domestic industries that depended on that supply. U.S. petrochemical plants, utility companies, and fertilizer manufacturers are now urging the Biden or Trump administration, whoever wins in 2025, to rethink trade policies before Canada becomes permanently reoriented toward the Pacific. Some experts warn that the US could soon find itself in the ironic position of needing to import more LNG, from countries like Australia or even Canada itself, at a premium. At the same time, emerging economies in Southeast Asia, like Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines, are also watching closely. As they transition from coal to cleaner fuels, Canadian LNG offers a stable supply chain without the baggage of Middle Eastern conflict zones or US foreign policy swings. Infrastructure is already expanding to accommodate these new possibilities. Terminals are being built or upgraded across Southeast Asian ports, while financial institutions are exploring carbon-neutral shipping options for LNG, an area where Canada's clean hydropowered origin gives it an edge in carbon accounting and ESG ratings. This isn't just an export story anymore. It's a strategic realignment of global energy flows, and Canada, once boxed in by geography and US dependency, is now helping redraw the LNG map. If Phase 2 moves forward and further terminals are added along Canada's west coast, we could see the country emerge not just as a supplier, but as a key diplomatic and economic bridge between the Pacific and Atlantic energy markets. One thing is clear. Canada is no longer a captive supplier to the US. It has broken free from pipeline dependency. It's exporting clean LNG to Asia on its own terms, faster, cheaper, and with less geopolitical baggage. This is more than Trump's tariffs backfiring. It's the rebirth of Canada as a global energy player. And it's only the beginning. What do you think? Will Canada lead the global LNG race, or get swept up by